Hello there, everybody, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar presentation of When Bots Attack, Sophisticated Bots and What Enterprise Security is Missing. Today's session is going to present some findings from a recent dark reading survey that Human and Dark Reading conducted and published earlier this year. And then we'll have a panel discussion on the impact of sophisticated bots on enterprise security, featuring our excellent panelists. So my name is Adam Sell. I'm Senior Editor of Human Insights at Human. And our panelists today for that discussion are Gavin Hill, VP of Human Insights at Human, and John Burke, CTO at Nemertes Research. I'd love to have our panelists introduce themselves. Gavin, why don't you kick us off?
Thanks, Adam. It's good to be here, and I'm looking forward to the conversation.
And John?
Pleasure to be here as well. Looking forward to it very much.
Excellent. Thank you both. And we will chat with you in just a couple of minutes about the results of this dark reading survey and about the impact of sophisticated bots on enterprise security. Our agenda for today's session is to go through some of the most compelling findings from that research. We'll have our panel discussion, and then we'll go into what some of the next steps and major takeaways are from both. So before we go into additional findings here, I wanted to share one of my favorite findings from the survey, and that's that nearly 3/4 of respondents suspect that the traffic on their organization's public-facing websites is generated by sophisticated bots as opposed to legitimate human activity. There are two things I want people to take away from this particular slide. The first is that the 25% of respondents who did not answer in the affirmative here, it's not that they don't have bot-based traffic coming to their website. It's that they don't know that they have bot-based traffic coming to their website. It is entirely possible, even likely, that those websites have bot-based traffic coming to their portal and conducting sophisticated attacks. And the other thing that's important to take away from this is that this statistic is consistent with a different research study that Human conducted the previous year into marketing fraud. So there is ample evidence that the majority of IT and marketing leaders recognize that there are a lot of bots coming to their website. The question is, what are they going to do about it? And what do they think the impacts are going to be? Before we continue, I wanted to ensure that everybody knew where they could get the full report from which the previous slide and the next several slides are derived. The report is available at humansecurity.com/darkreading and is called 3 out of 4 Attacks, Sophisticated Bots, and What Enterprise Security is Missing. The report contains a lot more information than we could possibly fit into this session, so I would encourage everybody to pick it up and scan through that. So one of the data points that I wanted to share here is that 75% of businesses say that bots can and will have a moderate or significant impact on their digital transformation initiatives. In light of the last several years of the work from home movement and COVID forcing everybody to adopt a distributed workforce, digital transformation initiatives had to accelerate dramatically. And when the vast majority, in fact, of businesses say that the bots that are attacking them are going to have a significant impact on those initiatives, it's an alarming finding to know that everybody working from home is now at a greater risk because the surface area has increased dramatically. Everybody's not locked within a single VPN. Another major finding from the research is that 1 in 4 businesses experienced a credential stuffing attack in the last 12 months, and 1 in 5 experienced an account takeover attack of another kind. These are pretty staggering findings because this doesn't even reflect the continued distributed workforce that we're all experiencing right now and have been for the last several years. This one is one of my personal favorite findings from the survey. 31% of businesses have already experienced compliance or regulatory issues as a result of bots. And this doesn't even include an ancillary statistic from the findings that 75% of respondents have some level of concern about staying compliant with new regulatory legislation like GDPR and CCPA. Everybody is worried about staying current, staying compliant with these privacy legislation, and bots are impacting that on a surprisingly large scale. Nearly half of all businesses, 47%, that were hit by bots lost revenue as a result of that attack. Nearly half of them also experienced negative customer experiences, and a quarter of the businesses hit by bots lost standing in the market. And despite that, less than 20%, less than a fifth of the businesses we surveyed have a bot specialist in place. The majority of them are relying on technologies like CDN, WAF, multi-factor authentication, or simple usernames or passwords to avoid bot attacks. These are wildly insufficient defenses against sophisticated bots. 3/4 of all of the businesses that we surveyed recognize that signals of automation, behavioral and device-based signals, would greatly enhance the identity and access management toolkits that they have in place. And with that, I would like to turn to our panel discussion. So if we could bring back Gavin and John, thank you so much. So the first question I would love to ask is, what has been your experience with sophisticated bots and automated attacks in the roles that you're currently in? And if you have any war stories that you might be able to share with our audience today. John, I think I'll start with you.
Sure. And our primary exposure to bots and need to respond to them came in our research capacity. We have, we talk to our clients. Our clients are dealing with their own versions of bot attacks. For us, it was that our ability to conduct research surveys online was first impeded and ultimately eliminated by the increasing sophistication of the bots that would troll for places to put data in and start putting data in. It went from an annoying thing we could easily scrub out in our cleansing operations, which are very rigorous, to an annoying thing that absolutely dwarfed in scale any other aspect of data cleansing. As bots got more sophisticated, as their ability to see and plausibly answer canary questions improved, as their ability to put not obvious gibberish into long form text answers improved. It never got perfect, but it got better and better and better over time, and it became more trouble than it was worth for us. So we've stopped doing that for the time being and may never go back to it.
I can imagine. Gavin, how about you?
It's actually interesting you bring up the point on bots impacting your survey results, John. At Human, we perform bot mitigation on a very regular basis. I mean, that's exactly what Human focuses on, is identifying and stopping bots. One such example is, and it's ironic that you brought up that example, is last year we did some research and we found that a quarter of marketing databases is actually corrupt by bots doing fake forms, or fake form fills, falsified information, fake clicks, etc. So it's interesting that it's even impacted you from a survey perspective. That's not the point I wanted to make. The point I actually wanted to make was we see a lot of automated attacks on a global basis, on a daily basis. It's exactly our forte and what we do. And I just want to reference a study that was published by LexisNexis, where they had found that 77% of attacks, and this is attacks on the internet, do utilize automation and bots. And if you think about it, often when I reference that stat, many in cybersecurity say, come on, that's a really high number. But when you think about it, cybercriminals are in the business to make money. And there's really two things that they want to focus on. One is, how do I, as a cybercriminal, obfuscate and hide my tracks? And the other is, if I'm in the business of making money, how do I scale that exponentially? You utilize, and you can utilize, automations, specifically bots, to achieve both those goals. Adam, you had mentioned in the research that we had found and validated again that credential stuffing is a big issue. And if you think about just going back to that stat that I just referenced of 77% of attacks, bots are used in attack path. With regard to credential stuffing, we're all human. Many people reuse their passwords, and those passwords and credentials are sold on the dark web, and it doesn't make sense to utilize those credentials and input them one by one to try and breach into a system. Rather use automation, and bots is that respective automation. I have many war stories, but I'll stop there because I know we've got many other topics to discuss.
Valuable point that you just brought up, though, the lack of awareness of how sophisticated the attack population is, that they're using all the same kinds of tools and automation that anybody else in sophisticated IT operations is using. It highlights this ongoing failure of imagination almost on the side of IT that still sticks with the idea that cybercriminals are cybercriminals. They're individuals, they're committing crimes to try and extract money from you, sort of on a one-on-one basis. And even when they're doing something sophisticated involving bots and AI and automation, there's still this thinking that it's just an adversary. And what it is this vast and complex, not just dark web, but dark economy of multiple layers of services that are available for hire. So it's not that all of these attackers are individually developing their own versions of AI and bot attacks. It's that somebody develops a service and sells it to a bunch of other folks who use it to attack you. So it's that scale that comes with a fully mature economy that's harnessing all these different technologies as services for hire. That I think you got to fully internalize that if you want to stand a chance of securing yourself against it.
And therein is the challenge as well, because they're using the same tools that IT practitioners are using. Think about like automated browsing environments, for example. They're using those same tools against systems that are designed to interact with humans, but they're abusing that workflow and that process from an automation perspective. A good comparison I like to use is if you think about the web application firewalls, that they're designed to stop and identify remote code execution, which is abusing the respective environment, which adversaries do take advantage of. But when you look at bot mitigation and how that compares to, say, a WAF, adversaries are abusing that login function, which is designed for a human to input their real name, their credentials, whatever the credentials may be it a username, an email address, and then ultimately their respective password. And then the human has to go and click on I'm not a human, and the bot is completely bypassing that entire process, utilizing the same tools that have been designed for IT practitioners. So you're quite right. You got to stop looking at it from there's an adversary and that adversary is just attacking me, but more look at it from they're running a business themselves and they're in it for profit, utilizing many of the same tools that are available to IT practitioners.
And we've been talking about the uses of automation and how it can be kind of twisted to carry out these attacks. Obviously, one of the knock-on effects, as we've been discussing, is the rise in bot attacks by these automated tools. And as these attackers have been increasing the intensity of their efforts and focusing on websites with a large number of visitors, where there's marketing programs and incentives in place to drive traffic, the breadth of the attacks is worth checking in on. And so I guess one of the questions I wanted to ask is, what do you feel are the biggest areas for improvement in bot management for your fellow security practitioners and executives? Gavin, I think I'll go to you first this time.
Thanks, Adam. I'm going to go with a non-technical answer. And that is maybe following on the comment that John, you made on visibility or lack of awareness of the problem, where when you look within an organization, there's really three camps of groups within an organization that are impacted by bots. The entire business is impacted by automated attacks, but when you look at the camps, you've got the marketing teams. I already mentioned how many marketing databases are corrupt, but you've got marketing teams who are trying to promote whatever the respective organization is selling to their target audience and capture the interest of that target audience so that they can ultimately buy from their organization. Then you have the fraud fighters who want to make sure that the cyber criminals are not fraudulently stealing money either from their respective clients or customers or even from the respective organization. And then you obviously have the security practitioners who are responsible for trying to defend all of this from adversaries. Oftentimes, what we find is those three groups are not talking to each other, yet they're trying to solve for the same business problem. And that business problem is, as an organization, I'm being attacked by some adversary or adversarial group out there, and they're doing it in such a way that it's through automation and it's impacting multiple parts of the business. But the irony is that those parts of the business aren't talking to each other to try and mitigate or solve for that respective problem. Most of the time we see at most two groups interacting or talking with each other, but never all three, even though automated attacks do impact the entire business. So we got to start looking at, don't just look at automated attacks and bots as a security problem, but rather look at it as a business problem and how do we solve from a business perspective.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more that getting everybody focused on the fact that damage to the business is damage to the business. Yeah. Whether it's that easily recognized immense data breach and your information's all out there on the dark web and you've got to send out notifications to everybody, whether it's that or it's a much more subtle corruption of the data upon the basis of which you are running your business, getting to the point where everybody's aware that the same problem, bots, is at the root of all these different kinds of damage to the business, and that damage to the business is damage no matter whether it's the kind you particularly work on every day or that guy over there works on every day. That can really change the way a company focuses its efforts. If everybody can get onto the same card as to damage is damage, and the same mechanism is being used to do both very overt kinds of attacks on us and to conduct either intentionally or unintentionally a much less obvious kind of attack, which is an attack on the integrity of the data. And if it's as little as a quarter of the data in a typical company's marketing database that is corrupt and thanks to bots, I would be a little surprised, just given the rapid ramp up in the number and variety of bots that are trying to basically fill in any kind of open access form that's out there. And if it's the wide end of the marketing funnel for you, the stuff that's meant to drive interest and get folks to engage for further follow-ups, or some other kind of open access mechanism for gathering data, everything that comes into it, you have to come to the realization that everything that comes into it is potentially corrupt. And whether that corruption is part of an actual adversary's attempt to get you to do the wrong thing, or just the byproduct of a different kind of attack where they're really looking for some way to get in and steal data from you, the fact is it's bad data, and you've got to figure out how to not let it steer you in the wrong direction.
One of the questions that I wanted to ask is, how do bot attacks change your priorities as a security executive? Do you feel like you need to shuffle around what you're planning for the next year in order to accommodate bots being so ubiquitous and attacking multiple business units at an organization?
For security executives specifically, I hope that it wouldn't require that they reshuffle their priorities, because these things should already have been a priority for them for the past couple of years, really. Making sure that their defenses are making use of automation as much as possible in order to improve the speed with which they respond to attacks or deploy new defenses against attacks, using more powerful, even AI-powered analytics tools to better detect and understand when an attack is occurring, and making sure that your defenses scale appropriately given the bigger attack surface that almost every business has these days than it used to have. All of these things should already have been on a security executive's priority list. If they haven't been, and this is the wake-up call, yes, put these things up in your top 5.
So one of the widespread negative impact of take that over. The widespread negative impact of bot attacks is supported by the survey, the results that I was speaking about a little bit earlier. And many of the organizations that we polled said that they could be very damaging to a business's standing in the market. If I recall correctly, a quarter of businesses said they lost standing as a result of a bot attack. Could you elaborate on what the impacts to a business's standing in the market might be? How about you, Gavin?
Sure, thanks. Why don't I answer with actually another war story? We had engaged a global market retailer who had suspected that they had a significant amount of traffic that they were dealing with from a bot perspective. Ironically, in additional, I suppose, research that we've conducted as well, what we found is, nearly half of organizations really find it difficult or are not able to distinguish between the difference between automated traffic and real human traffic. In that case, this is an example that I wanted to really use, and that is this global market retailer, they had about 70% of bot traffic that they were dealing with. And talking about the damage to the business, when we evaluated that respective traffic and dug into the details, what we found was one of their competitors was doing price scraping on their respective sites. So not only were they losing customers because their competitor was offering lower pricing, but they were also paying for the infrastructure costs to handle that respective bot traffic. So that 70-odd% of bot traffic, just a 1% reduction in that bot traffic saved them in excess of $250,000 per year. So multiply 1% by $250,000, and it's a rather large number that they had to pay in infrastructure costs, which is, I would class as damage to the business, in addition to loss of revenue because they were losing customers from their competitor doing that price scraping. That's just one example. Other areas that everybody should be, or I think the audience listening to this webinar is acutely aware of Log4j. When Log4j came out earlier this year, we noticed a significant spike in bot traffic where adversaries were, going back to the example I used earlier of where bots are used in 77% of attacks. What adversaries were doing was, instead of doing a reconnaissance phase, looking which systems can be infected or impacted by the respective exploit, they were just doing something that we call exploit stuffing. And exploit stuffing was where they were utilizing automation to see which systems were vulnerable to Log4j. But instead of waiting, they were just actually, I use the term, spraying and praying and seeing which systems they could own, and then ultimately adding those systems to their respective botnets for crypto mining. So again, damage to the business because you're utilizing system resources where your IT team is now having to handle and support those system resources for potentially other applications that might be impacted.
And it's interesting to think about other kinds of potential business damage when there's a literal singular adversary, in the sense of that competitor who hired the botnet to do the data scraping.
Yeah.
Suppose they had also focused on inserting bad data into the databases to try and warp the business strategy of their competitor. Suppose they had been saying consistently, I really wish I had more of an in-person experience. I don't want to shop online from you anymore. I want a store closer to me. And if they had given a sufficiently slanted version of that answer across geographies, across demographics, they might have induced their competitor to build more stores, more brick and mortar stores. And the level of it misinvested funding and wasted effort there, potentially staggering, potentially business ending. So the possibility of really getting corrupt data into the analysis engines of other companies and getting them to make the wrong decisions based on what you want them to do is subtle and frightening, and that much more possible in an age of AI-powered bots.
So moving on, we have seen, not just in this survey, but in just the years that we've been fighting the bot mitigation fight, that there remains an educational and awareness gap across organizations, and even within organizations, across business units, about the capabilities of sophisticated bots. What can they do? What are they doing? What might be coming next? We were just talking about how some organizations might have the idea to try to plant false evidence within another company's data set and force them to make some incorrect assumptions and decisions as a result of that. What do we think are the reasons for that education and awareness gap? John, how about I come to you first?
You could put some of it down to what is, to my mind, sort of a pervasive techno-positivism in IT organizations, especially, that the idea that all these wonderful advances that are taking place in IT, all the miracles in AI, those are going to be good things. It's just this sort of baseline assumption. This is going to be a good thing, and it takes persistent, repetitive, diligent reminding, basically, to get people to understand that absolutely every technology that's being employed to improve business operations, to speed up responses to clients or customer needs, to better analyze the data so we understand better what people want from us, every single one of those technologies is being turned into a weapon and pointed at them at the same time. And that it's not individuals that are doing this to them. It is a whole economy and a whole very diversified set of dark businesses, basically, that are facing their business and employing absolutely every technology available in the effort to steal from them, disable them, or extort money from them.
So then why are the anti-bot features like CDN, WAF, CAPTCHA, multi-factor authentication, why aren't they enough? We've got these tools in place that are intended to help stop bots, but they're not actually pulling it off. Gavin, what do you think? Why aren't they adequate for dealing with the increasing sophistication of bot attacks?
Yeah, similar to what I touched on earlier, where I was giving an explanation of a web application firewall, or WAF. Just going back to the point I made, when you think about what exactly adversaries are doing, and just to John's point that he made earlier, that adversaries and the whole organized crime syndicates are utilizing the same IT tools that have been designed for IT teams and exploiting and taking advantage of systems and processes that are designed for human interaction. Whereas when you look at many of the solutions that you had mentioned, let's just look at CAPTCHA as an example. So the whole intent of deploying CAPTCHA on your respective web application is to try and stop automation or stop bots and verify that I am actually a human interacting with your web application. But ultimately, and there's a lot of research out there, CAPTCHAs create friction, and they create friction and annoyance to the very target that you want to do business with, in where that target, humans, oftentimes get frustrated because they can't solve the fire hydrant puzzle, or trying to type in the random word that's input there. You can't even read the characters yourself, and you input the wrong thing, and you oftentimes get frustrated with it. And in fact, the irony is where you have to click on it, I'm a human, or I'm not a robot. That's just been designed to try and stop that, and yet you get click farms and you get automated tools like anti-CAPTCHA, for example, which, just going back to John's point, are available on the dark web and are available as a service by cybercriminals for cybercriminals to bypass and obfuscate some of those techniques and those solutions in place. So looking at a lot of these solutions that are put in place, so CDN, WAF, CAPTCHA, their primary focus is not for bot mitigation. Their primary focus is how do I stop, like I had mentioned, WAFs? How do I stop like a remote code execution? CDN is how do I deliver that content to you in as expedient a time as possible? Whereas MFA is how do I ensure that this is somebody that the right person that I'm authenticating with. And yet just earlier this year, there was a breach where bots were used. I'm not going to mention the name, but where bots were used to bypass MFA itself. So bots are designed to break or bypass the very processes that are built for human interaction. And that's why many of those solutions don't work, because those solutions, their core competence or their primary, I suppose, capabilities are not for bot mitigation. They're not designed around stopping and identifying is this automated traffic versus human traffic. And it's incredibly difficult to determine human traffic versus automated traffic, because human traffic, when you look at the actual session information, human traffic is fairly sporadic. Even if I'm going to my banking website and I'm doing exactly the same thing, regardless if I'm on a mobile app or actually on the web app, my interaction or my session information is going to be slightly different. Whereas a bot, they might mimic or copy that interaction, but it becomes incredibly difficult to identify that unless, of course, you're looking at large swaths of data. And once you start looking at large swaths of data, you can start identifying the same behavioral patterns in that session information to determine whether or not it's a bot. And the only way you can do that is by looking at trillions of interactions on a daily basis across the entire globe. So that's oftentimes why bots do bypass many of these techniques or capabilities that are in place, because their bots are designed to bypass that human interaction of how systems are frankly designed.
I think the way to help people think about it is to say these systems are typically out there so that you can interact with a business. And all these other defenses or technologies are there to provide a little gating, in the sense of CAPTCHA, a little gating on who gets into it. But the whole point is there's a channel there for you, whoever, human or bot, for you to communicate with the business. Perfect defense would require shutting that down, right? The only way to totally close it is to totally close it. And if it's open for input, then tools that use the input as a way to try and accomplish their ends are inevitable. And because AI is becoming so much more sophisticated annually, their ability to worm their way through whatever defenses you've put on that, knowing that you can't just close it off entirely, that ability improves as well. And so the need for escalating vigilance and better sophistication in techniques for detecting automatically generated data become paramount. Looking at the state of AI, though, I don't know how much longer it's going to be possible. I mean, if you've got AIs out there that can pass the Turing test, sustain an hour of conversation with a human without detection, there's not much they're not going to be able to do in a web form.
So looking a bit into the future here, we spoke a little bit earlier about how many companies aren't acting on bot management until it affects their customer. We referenced a statistic from the findings that 50% of those impacted by bots had poor customer experiences as a result. Why is it so risky for businesses to wait until it actually impacts their customers to take any sort of action on bot mitigation? John, let's go to you first.
Take your pick of the folksy wisdom. You want to close the barn door after the horses have escaped? Do you not remember that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure? It's less damaging to the business and operations to head off attacks than to remediate them after the fact, to fix the damage and pay the penalties. Some kinds of damage, especially these days, you don't recover from, and you go out of business, and the people who work for you go out of jobs, and you don't get a do-over on these things typically. So it's best to put as much resource as you can into preventing these kinds of attacks and detecting them as quickly as you can after one of them succeeds, rather than just dealing with the damage after it's occurred.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, I personally would boil it all down to customer satisfaction, right? We spoke a little bit about digital transformation, and in the research as well, there's some statistics around digital transformation, so please to go ahead and reference the research. But when you look at digital transformation, consider what is the main motivation for digital transformation that many organizations are going through, and that is, how do I better serve my customer? And how do I, and one of those ways is through customer satisfaction. Now, if your user experience is impeded because customers are frustrated with capture, or John, to your point, where you've got to deal with fake forms or fake clicks, and now there's issues with regard to promoting the wrong goods to the wrong customers, or as a customer, you're promoting from a digital advertising perspective, you've got my profile completely wrong, and you're promoting the wrong things to me, and I'm just not going to be interested. Guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to go to another retailer and get what I want, right? That intrigues and interests me. So I think when you boil it all down, you've got to focus on the customer satisfaction and put in place tools and procedures that's going to help improve that customer satisfaction and thereby mitigate the automated attacks against the organization.
So then what is the best place for an organization to start in a journey, if they haven't already, in mitigating sophisticated bots?
I'll go first. I think the best place is first understand, from your web applications, try and understand what's automated traffic versus what's human traffic. That's job one. And once you understand automated traffic and human traffic, well, then you need to decide, well, which automated traffic is malicious and which is not. Because one thing that we didn't touch on in this session is not all bots are bad. Not all automated traffic is bad. You have IT tools and bots that are designed, which do create automated traffic to monitor systems, for example. So first identify and make a determination of what's automated traffic versus human traffic. And then the next step would be, right, for that automated traffic, what is the malicious traffic that I need to try and mitigate against, and which is the automated traffic that is okay to deal with.
Anything to add, John?
I think maybe even just one step back from where Gavin took off, I would say awareness of the scope and scale of the problem. As we've been discussing, so many people in the enterprise just don't have a clear picture in their head of what the dark economy that's pointing all these bots at the organization is, the scope and scale of that, and the different motivations that different players in that market have for making sure their services are the best and most sophisticated and automated and intelligent, and that anything that faces out on the internet is vulnerable to at least the attempt to attack and compromise using this broad array of tools. So that awareness, I think, can then make people ready to start having that conversation about, well, for us, where are we collecting information like this, or making services like this available to our clients, and how much of the data that we're working with through those tools is suspect or corrupt or false.
Before we transition into the final portion of our presentation here, I wanted to ask if you had any closing thoughts for the audience today. How about you, John?
I would say that my closing thought in context of everything that we've said so far is, if this isn't already a high-level priority for your business, make it one across cybersecurity, infrastructure, marketing, design, development, all the aspects of the business that want to get data off the public, that want to interact with the public, with your clients, with your customers, anything that involves that channel to the outside. You need to have that awareness now that all inputs are potentially suspect and the result of bot traffic, and that now is the time to stiffen your defenses against that, again, across the entire environment, not expecting to succeed perfectly in gating at admission bots from your environment. You're not going to succeed. So what are you going to do once the bots have gotten in? How are you going to detect the data that they put into your systems? How are you going to prevent them from compromising or corrupting your systems? Lots of different layers of defense and layers of mitigation are going to go into protecting yourself from this kind of problem.
I think I'm going to add, I agree with John. I'll end with that awareness point that John made, and just going back to what I had mentioned earlier, where there's multiple groups within every organization that have to deal with bots or are impacted by bots. And I had mentioned like the marketing group, the fraud fighters, and the security teams, so the IT security teams. Bots are a business problem. It's not just a IT security problem. And I think that's my closing remark is, within an organization, start looking at bot mitigation and the impact that bots do have on the entire business, because they're impacting the business from an infrastructure cost perspective. They're impacting the business from your go-to-market strategy perspective. They're impacting your business from a fraudulent perspective. So there's multiple areas within a business. It's a business problem. It's not just a cybersecurity problem.
Excellent. Thank you, Gavin. And we'll transition now back to the slide deck here. Excellent. In the next steps, I wanted to briefly recap some of the key takeaways from the research and from our panel discussion today. And the first is that there is a significant disconnect between the expected and experienced impacts of bot attacks and planning surrounding sophisticated bots. Two of the most cited potential impacts of a bot attack that we found in our research that would drive businesses to think about implementing a bot specialist solution were bad customer experiences and loss of standing in the market. And as we've mentioned a couple of times throughout this presentation, of the businesses that were hit by bots, half of them then suffered from bad customer experiences, and a quarter of them suffered a loss of standing in the market. And despite that, again, less than 20% of businesses that we surveyed had a bot specialist in place. Speaking of, the tools that are in place right now aren't getting it done. Both John and Gavin spoke to the purposes of the tools that many organizations are using to combat bots, and the fact that none of them are really purpose-built to do this, that CDNs have a specific goal, that WAFs have a specific goal, and none of them are really built from the ground up to stop bots. The features on these solutions aren't enough to stop the sophisticated bots that are going to cause these impacts that we were discussing. And the businesses that have a solution in place, a dedicated solution, they are far better poised to prevent breaches and to prevent those impacts. And finally, compliance is a major concern. As mentioned earlier, 75% of respondents identified compliance as a significant threat, that they were worried about maintaining compliance with privacy initiatives like GDPR, CCPA, CPRA, and 31% of the businesses we surveyed had already experienced compliance issues as a result of sophisticated bots. There are numerous states and numerous countries adding to the privacy legislation patchwork quilt out there. And as more continue to pass legislation and implement it, that challenge is only going to get worse. I'd like to remind everybody that if you'd like to read more about the survey, you can get that at humansecurity.com/darkreading. And I would, again, encourage everybody to please check that out. I'd like to thank John and Gavin for participating in our discussion today. And if you have any questions about bot mitigation and where you can learn more about how to prevent sophisticated bots from having an impact on your business, please visit us at humansecurity.com or reach out to us at botornot@humansecurity.com. Thank you so much.
Thank you.